Yeah, so I'm Geoff. I use he, him pronouns, but they, them is cool too. Um, I'm a developer. I do a bunch of things with Drupal. I've been working with Drupal for about 11 or 12 years now. Got started when I was still in university, kind of on a side project that I was doing when I needed something more than my own home-built CMS. So picked up Drupal is something to work with and have stuck with it through the years. Within the community, I try to do a bunch of contributions around making privacy and security better for Drupal sites. So I have a couple modules around that. And outside of that, I have a very free household with a dog and 2 cats. And I try to spend quite a bit of time biking is one of my major hobbies. So yeah. So today I'm talking about ADHD, which first of all is not always a great name for it. A lot of the conception around it really focuses on what's in the name, the hyperactivity, and a lot of times of like a lack of attention is usually what is interpreted as. And that gives a very particular stereotype. It's usually done in an academic context. Usually it's young kids who are diagnosed, and especially boys are like twice as likely to get diagnosed as girls, even though there really, as far as we know, isn't that much of a difference in distribution between who's affected between genders. And it really is that very active, hyperactive, always distracting others stereotype that really gets the attention because, it's external and it affects other people. And that makes sense, I think, for kids, when you have young kids who maybe don't really understand what's different between their behavior and others, how they're affecting others with their behavior, and don't really, have that internal awareness of how their experience is different than others. The diagnostic criteria focuses on those external factors because it's necessary, but as you grow up and you get older, there's a lot of things that are internal and very different. As well, like one of the issues is that, ADHD doesn't always come alone. And sometimes it's actually other issues like dyslexia, dyscalculia, issues with math and numbers, when they start struggling in school and having difficulty with things, that you look into an issue of, oh, they have a problem with regulating their attention and their executive function. That really is the thing that triggers them to go, okay, well, we need to find a solution for that. And their excessive energy, their inability to sustain focus on some of these tasks is sort of compounding those other issues where they're having trouble staying on task when reading something that, has another difficulty for them. And the downside of that, there's so many people who are different. Hyperactive is not the only type of ADHD. The other main one is inattentive, and as opposed to being, always energetic, unable to sit still, inattentive is sort of the daydreamer, just still like losing attention, phasing out, not being able to focus on tasks. But instead of getting restless and antsy and not being able to sit still, it really moves into daydreaming, going off into space, making up a fantasy world in your head, staring out the window at what's going on outside. And since it doesn't really disrupt other people, it doesn't get the same sort of attention. And especially combined with someone who's still doing okay in school, maybe not great, maybe not terrible, they're doing just fine, especially in elementary and high school, where it is still a very structured, regimented environment in most cases. That can get really overlooked, and those people still have challenges, but they might just be coping. And, that might work for a while, but eventually they hit a point where things change. For a lot of people, that's going into, going to college, university, especially if they're moving away from home for the first time. They're losing a lot of the structures and support that they've grown up around and thrown into a new environment, and they have to figure so much out. And all of those coping mechanisms that they might have built up over the years break down, and they're struggling, putting more and more effort trying to manage attention, keep on top of tasks, and they just don't have that same capability to do it anymore. They don't have the capability to manage that extra stuff. University, college, is a big one when those things break down. And there's, I think for me as well, one of the challenges, I continue to go do pretty well in university, like parts of it, because I was able to go into a major that I was really interested in. I got a computer science degree, and I'd been playing with computers for years. So it was just, a lot of it was more fun, doing stuff that I was interested in. And since it caught my attention, I was able to do really well in a lot of courses. I was willing and interested to spend extra time on some programming projects because, it was fun and I wanted to do more of it. Whereas there was other courses that were maybe still kind of interesting, but not as engaging, or didn't come as sort of naturally to me in a way. Like I took a course in film studies, which was a fantastic course. I loved the material, but staying awake and engaged in some of these dense movies that we were watching was really difficult for me. And like, I'm happy I got through the course. I'm happy I learned what I did with it, but it was a struggle to get through. And there were definitely a couple of courses where, as much as I cared about doing well, there was a couple that I was honestly like afraid that I wasn't going to pass at the same time that I was getting like top marks in some of my computer science courses. But I made it through. Other people, other life changes. Starting new relationships puts different pressures on, having to support someone else's needs and communicate with them. Yeah, if you didn't move out at home for school or university afterwards, like moving out once you're a little bit older with a new partner, trying to figure out all those routines with them as opposed to, what you're used to with your family or on your own, or with, now you're with roommates. Those are all different struggles where you're having to adapt your mechanisms of getting through life to a new circumstance. And, there isn't a whole lot to prepare you for some of those things. Other people, definitely having kids, you have a big demand on you in changing your life and new responsibilities. And some people do just fine, or so they think, and then their kid gets diagnosed is one thing that I've heard a lot of. Their teacher goes, "Hey, maybe you should get your kid checked out." And it's like, well, like the kid is just like me. Like, yeah, they're having challenges, but I had those same challenges and I came out fine. And then it's like, oh, maybe things could be different for me too. Maybe things could be a little bit easier for me. Just being unaware of like how much effort you were putting into things before that just wasn't the same as everyone else. And I think one of the bigger factors, like I think is really important, is, like I mentioned before, other learning issues that might come along with ADHD, as well as other mental health concerns. Anxiety is kind of a tough one to separate in a lot of times. Do you have a predisposition to anxiety on its own, or is it, that you find your own brain a little unreliable? Like you can't always count on being able to remember the things that you need to when you want to, or you can't really rely on, you really need to get something done and you're going to have the focus and attention at demand to take it on, to follow through with something that you really care about. And similar things, like with depression, other comorbidities, autism is actually pretty prevalently common, that a lot of people with ADHD have autism as well, or a lot of autistic people also have ADHD. And that's one of those factors that a lot of times is that masking. You know, you're in school, there's a lot of pressure for you to perform well, to continue through it. And kind of being anxious enough to like force yourself through the tough parts of school to keep going and doing well. And yeah, that's definitely one of the issues with the diagnosis is that, you know, when kids, especially girls and women, get to high school, university, a lot of times they're diagnosed with anxiety or depression, sometimes as well bipolar. And while those might be legitimate additional things, like they're not the root cause. And a lot of times, especially that's overlooked and is one of the factors in kind of the lower rates of women getting diagnosed with ADHD is just, it's unfortunately very much dismissed of like, oh, it's just anxiety, it's just depression, you know, we'll address those things and that's it. And doesn't really look deeper. Whereas with boys, it is a little bit more so, oh, like you're restless and have lots of energy, like, you know, can't sit still and have a racing mind. You might have ADHD as opposed to being anxiety the default. So yeah, just a big mix of kind of what goes into it as well. Other factors, definitely like where you grow up, you know, what your family situation is like, how supportive your family is, what sort of coping mechanisms they're able to instill in you. ADHD has a very strong genetic component. So if your parents have it and do fine, they maybe transferred a lot of those skills onto you and you might have picked them up being unaware. So that might delay just you being able to get through the structured earlier parts of your life and other things being a little bit more difficult later. You know, class and race as well, cultural background, all affect, you know, again, similar to other mental health issues. Like, do people actually think it's a big deal? Or unfortunately, very commonly, do they just reduce it down to, oh, this is a personal thing. You just need to try harder. You just need to focus a little bit more. You're smart, you have so much potential, you just need to put in some extra effort. And that is really defeating when, you know, people just think, you know, it's not an issue that has this other cause, this underlying cause that can be addressed and can make things better. So yeah, so going on, like what is the internal experience like? One of the factors, kind of the physiological explanation that's most common, is that ADHD is kind of a difference in the brain's level of dopamine, kind of as a baseline. And that has an impact on how you feel rewarded about things. Like, you know, a lot of neurotypical people don't think about it, but like just doing small tasks, like cleaning up your desk, gives you a small boost of a reward of like you've accomplished something. And unfortunately for people with ADHD, like that just doesn't happen in the same way to the same amount. And especially tied into like kind of the personalizing the problem. For a lot of people, it's like, oh, well, that's just expected. Like that's the minimum to keep your room clean when you're a kid. So when you do keep your room clean, when you do clean it up, like it's just what you were expected to do, and there's no like extra benefit or reward to it. And that becomes really defeating. And in the workplace, it's, you know, I spend so much time trying to work myself up to get started, to gain momentum on tasks, that at the end of the day, like I don't feel like I've done enough. I didn't get what I wanted to do, or I didn't get enough of what I wanted to get done. And at the end of the day, there's always more to do. And like, I feel like maybe I did the bare minimum. That's really hard to get ahead of. And just to say, oh, I'll get to it tomorrow, when you have a really rough day and you feel like you're always behind like that, it's really hard to look forward and say, oh, I'll have a better day tomorrow, when I don't necessarily know that I can rely on some extra motivation kicking in all of a sudden. And one of the big things that I find a lot of people's experience with ADHD, like it's very contradictory in a lot of ways. both between, an individual's characteristics as well as across populations and different people. And some of the things that are made to be kind of discounting, just like, with it, inattention, you're not hyperactive, you're not sitting restless. Fatigue is actually really common. A couple factors that feed into that are kind of sleep challenges are very common. Sort of a lot of people have a delayed sleep phase. They just don't get tired, at that regular sunset time getting into the evening. Their mind is still going, and it makes it harder to fall asleep, to wind down from things, like to get going. Sometimes people just lay in bed for a long time until they're just exhausted and kind of collapse. And then their natural time to waking up is not, the regular hours, giving them enough time to get up before work and do things in the morning. Like if they didn't have any responsibilities, they'd sleep until 10 or noon. So forcing them to get up earlier really cuts into kind of what their body naturally wants to do for sleep, and also affects the quality of that sleep, makes it a lot more difficult to stay asleep and get well rested, making it so that you're, tired the next day. And even just, aside from that physical component, just the mental aspect of, your brain always thinking through things and jumping between different topics and never really getting a rest from thinking at all, is really draining. Tied into not feeling like you got enough done during the day. It's really hard to get a break from work and say, okay, it's 5, I'm done, I'm not going to think about work anymore, and go do something to refresh myself. Well, no, like I got to catch up later, and I want to finish something later when I get a second win at 10 o'clock, but I'm still like thinking through work from 5 till 10, even though I'm trying to do things for myself. You don't get that break, and especially for me, like that makes it feel like, okay, well, you're catching up in the evening, and then you're going to bed and getting up in the morning and just jumping back into it, and you don't get that mental break. Another one, common thing, rejective sense of dysphoria. It's not like an official documented diagnosis right now, but a common experience between ADHD and other neurodivergent people, where it's very much sort of a catastrophizing around potential, anticipated, or just perceived rejection, even if it isn't actually there. And that's a difficult one. It's texting a friend a comment and not hearing back for a while and immediately going, oh no, I've done something wrong and they hate me now. As opposed to being like, oh, they're just busy, or getting like a short comment from them and saying like, oh, they, that message had an angry tone to it, when it was just, them firing off a short reply. And the other factor of it as well, like I mentioned, is the perceived rejection. So it's not just like someone did something that, was an actual or potential rejection, and you just don't have enough information, you're catastrophizing about it. It can also be, I anticipate something. And I've heard a few people like applying for jobs is really difficult because like, I'm going to put my time and effort and put myself out there, and I don't want to be shot down for a job that I might be interested in, because that's really going to hurt. It's going to be like so bad that it's physically painful that I just don't want to put myself out there. And that like is really harmful for people being able to take on new opportunities, do new interesting things, because they're just shutting themselves down before they ever take on that opportunity. And it's really difficult. And then another component is time perception is a little wibbly wobbly. It's very much in the now, and that's, I think, some of where that hyperactivity comes from. If something isn't interesting, it's going off. And it's short-term things like planning of just like, okay, well, I got to be out the door on time for something. Do I have enough time to clean up my kitchen before I go? Or take on this task? But also like with work tasks, like how long is it going to take me to debug this issue? And when I'm in the middle of it, focusing on, okay, well, I think I'm almost there, I think I've always got it, and having my manager go like, hey, how's this task going? And being like, well, I think I'm almost there, and just being in that phase for a couple hours, like, how do I know if I'm close to being like 10 minutes done, or this is going to take the rest of the day done? And it can come on to bigger issues in life for planning. Like, how do you plan out a career when you're really focused on just like getting through the day or the week or the quarter? Or performance review time is always really difficult. Like, what did I actually do over the last 3 or 6 months? As opposed to like, what have I been working just on like yesterday? And that makes it really hard to be positive about your accomplishments and hopeful towards the future in a bunch of ways. Just being this like narrow focus on what's right now, it's really hard to break out of. But I don't want to be just a downer. There's a whole lot of other positive things. Like, a lot of these traits, are just a difference and a balance. One of those things about like, that hyperactivity and being kind of contradictory in crisis situations, when the adrenaline's pumping, it can be a lot of like, it can be overwhelming for people. With a lot of people with ADHD, it's just like, okay, well, like, what do I have to do? That immediacy of needing to solve a problem and get something done really narrows the focus, and can be very effective in those sorts of situations. In technology, things like site reliability engineering or infrastructure management, where if production goes down, you have to jump on it right away and be able to have a clear head and work through a problem. ADHD can be a big benefit there. Unfortunately, on the other side, it can also be, promote burnout if you don't get a break from that thing. It's really intense. It can be really engaging. It can be really rewarding. But also you need to be able to make sure that you can step back from it, and get a rest. Another component, a difficult one for me, like, I'm not very artistic. So hearing creativity being often a very common thing for people with ADHD was like, well, I'm not creative. Like, I'm terrible at drawing. I've been trying to learn guitar for years and I'm not getting very far. But in technology, it's a lot of other components, like just having the curiosity to like learn and explore different things because they're interesting. Like, my role has always been spread across, front end, back end. I've done like DevOps type stuff, done a little bit of infrastructure type things because it was fun, just because I was curious about it and I wanted to know more. And just being, a magpie with shiny bits of new information, having fun with that. That can be really beneficial to, solving problems. When someone runs up to something, you can be just like, oh, I've seen something like that before. I've done something similar. Having a benefit of connecting those disparate thoughts sometimes really quickly in a way that other people aren't as readily able to do. One of my big Drupal contributions, the one that has the most users, was like 2 years of going, hey, this is a neat thing in Drupal 8. Like, this could, be some fun things to do with it to make it a little bit more powerful, and Contrib can do more with it. And then a little bit later going, hey, there's this neat new thing that browsers are implementing to make sites more secure. And then like a year later going, hey, like, there was an article on like a supply chain check about like how you could potentially have malicious code injected into the JavaScript in your site, and being like, hey, Drupal could do some really cool things, making this really accessible in a way that other CMSs, other technologies can't. Like, I can build this, and something that other people probably just didn't really think about or like have the initiative to get on. So connecting those parts, I think, has been a big advantage to me in my career, taking on things that other people just necessarily wouldn't see, as well as just like being able to dive into those interesting things, can have a big benefit to organizations that really allow people to do that, to follow their interests and be productive and interesting and provide value in those areas. So yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about the benefits. A lot of advice is really simple, but not entirely helpful. And I think one of the big things, especially with ADHD, there's this block of that first step is never actually really all that clear. A lot of people take their advice as being like, okay, well, this is, straightforward. But I think one of the big challenges is like planning, conceptualizing the challenge, understanding what's wrong is a whole lot of work. And a lot of people are just able to step into that piece by piece, without a lot of forethought. But a lot of neurodivergent people, that's a big challenge. They really have to understand a lot before they can go and say, hey, I'm confident about doing this and moving forward with it. So I think one of the big things to keep in mind is be kind to yourself. Like, stuff's hard. And you're working hard on doing things. Give yourself, the time and the grace to make mistakes, take extra time to do some things, because it's not the same effort for you as it is for everyone else. There's lots of great resources out there. How to ADHD is a YouTube channel with lots of little things about how to get around some of the kind of challenges, distortions that come up, and difficulties. As well, there's lots of places on Twitter. A couple of the graphics that I used were from Danny Donovan and Pina, who create comics. Danny Donovan is also on TikTok, sharing hints and tips and things to work with. Renee Brooks and Dusty Chipura are ADHD coaches, which is a great resource. Renee Brooks has quite a few articles. They also have a bunch of workbooks to work through problems. They're both ADHD themselves, so they've gone through a lot of similar challenges, and they write from that perspective. It's probably going to be a lot more relatable. Dusty also has a bunch of workshops that she regularly does, and having like a hands-on environment going through with other people at the same time online can be really motivating and helpful. And as well, a lot of the creators also have communities. The coaches sometimes run communities themselves. That can be really beneficial, having people that go through some of the same struggles as you. One of my favorite parts about some of these communities that I'm part of is they have a small victories channel for those days when having something more than coffee for breakfast is an achievement, and having people cheer you on and be excited about it, because they know how difficult that is sometimes too. I mentioned kind of that task list, breaking it down into the smallest possible thing you need to get started. Sometimes it's really difficult, but it's really necessary. Like, keep on breaking it down to the smallest thing that you can do just to gain some momentum. And then that list part, externalizing it, like having a lot of things bouncing around your head is really difficult. So kind of look into what kind of tools help, what actually is beneficial about a calendar, what is beneficial about a to-do list, what sort of reminders do you need? You don't need to stick with one tool at a time or over time. You can switch between them as they're beneficial, and use the benefits of each one as they come to you. Experimenting, trying something new, like a bullet journal is really intimidating to start with. A lot of people go crazy with what they do, but like, what's the simplest thing that works? And if it helps you get through a couple weeks, that's great. If it doesn't work for a while, put it away, come back when you think it's going to be beneficial again. I'm kind of at the end. I didn't get into a lot of the organizational things. I think one of the big things to remember for organization is that everybody has these same struggles. They're just bigger and sometimes more frequent for people with ADHD. So like, if you're a manager, if you're running a company, it's really about giving people support, understanding, autonomy, letting them take on things that are interesting and valuable to them so that they really can provide value to your team, to your organization. Yeah. Uh, I appreciate everyone's time. I hope this was helpful, and definitely I'll be around to chat about things.
Thank you so much. I think, speaking for myself, that talk really resonated. And I think based on some of the conversation in the chat and in the diversity and inclusion channel in Slack, I think it was more than just me. Thank you.